The floorboard groans in the empty apartment above me every night at exactly 3:03 a.m., a sound that defies all logic since I have lived on this building's penthouse for 10 years. I first noticed it during a thunderstorm when the electricity died, leaving me alone with the rhythmic creak of weight shifting on rotting wood. At first, I assumed it was the settling of old timber or perhaps a neighbor in the unit directly below me hearing their own noises and projecting them upward. But then I taped my phone to the ceiling to record the frequency, confirming the sound originated from above my headboards. I checked the blueprints myself, tracing the lines until my eyes burned, verifying that there is no attic, no loft, and certainly no floor above mine. The building manager laughed when I complained, showing me the roof access door that had been welded shut since the renovation in 2014. So why does the dust motes dance in the air from a disturbance that shouldn't exist? Why do the vibrations rattle my teeth in a pattern that mimics footsteps pacing back and forth? Last night I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor with a flashlight, staring up at the white plaster ceiling, waiting for the clock to strike. When 3:03 arrived, the creak was louder, closer, as if the person walking was pressing their bare feet against the underside of my world. I felt a sudden drop in temperature, a chill that smelled faintly of wet earth and decayed roses. Then slowly, the plaster directly above my face began to bulge outward, cracking with a sound like breaking bone. I realized then that the sound wasn't coming from above me at all. It was coming from inside the walls, walking toward my room. The notification glowed on my phone screen, declaring that the front door had just been unlocked from the outside. I stared at the timestamp, my blood turning to ice because it was 3 a.m. and I live alone. There are no other keys in existence. I melted the spare mold myself years ago after a break-in shattered my sense of security. I walked to the window, peering through the blinds into the pitch-black night, expecting to see an intruder crouching on the porch. The motion sensor camera feed showed nothing but empty pavement and swaying shadows cast by the street lamp. No footsteps, no breathing, just the silent, oppressive weight of the darkness pressing against the glass. Yet the app insisted the lock had disengaged, a digital ghost turning the tumbler with impossible precision. I rushed to the door, hand hovering over the deadbolt, waiting for it to click open on its own. It remained firmly shut, heavy and immovable, defying the software's frantic updates. A cold sweat pricked my skin as I realized the notification wasn't reporting an event that had already happened. It was a live feed of what was happening right now, directly beneath my feet. I looked down at the floorboards, noticing how they were vibrating with a rhythmic, scratching intensity. The sound wasn't coming from outside trying to get in, but from inside trying to get out. Something had been living in the walls for weeks, waiting for me to install the smart lock so it could finally leave. The glass doesn't lie, but my reflection has started to improvise. At first, I thought it was just sleep deprivation causing me to misjudge timing, a simple lag in my own perception. But yesterday, while brushing my teeth, I saw its lips curl into a smirk before mine even twitched. It wasn't a delayed echo anymore. It was an anticipation of actions I hadn't taken yet. This morning, the grief hit me like a physical blow, and tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. I looked up at the mirror, expecting to see my own shattered expression staring back in solidarity. Instead, the thing on the other side of the glass wiped its eyes dry with a casual, indifferent swipe. While I sobbed into my hands, it leaned forward, pressing its palms against the cold surface from the inside out. Its mouth stretched wide, far wider than human anatomy should allow, revealing rows of needle-thin teeth. It didn't mimic my sorrow, it savored it like a fine wine. Then slowly and deliberately, it blinked a full second after I did, breaking the synchronization completely. I realized then that the lag wasn't a delay in its reaction to me. It was simply waiting for me to fall asleep so it could finally step out. The first photograph showed the back of my head, staring at a television screen that was currently off. I dropped the stack of Polaroids onto the dusty floorboards, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The attic smelled of rotten old lavender, a scent that used to mean safety before she died. Each picture in the pile was dated for next Tuesday, a day that hadn't happened yet. They captured mundane moments, me drinking coffee, me sleeping, me standing exactly where I am now. But the lighting in every single frame was wrong, cast by a source that doesn't exist in my apartment's wiring. I looked closer at the third image and noticed a figure standing in the corner of my bedroom, blurred and indistinct. The figure wasn't looking at me. It was looking over my shoulder, directly at the camera lens. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but when I pulled it out, there were no notifications, only a sudden, deafening silence. I realized then that the attic wasn't just full of her memories, but hers specifically, preserved in a loop she couldn't escape. The final photo was still developing, the chemicals swirling to form an image of me holding the camera itself. The face peering out from behind the lens wasn't mine, but hers, smiling with teeth that had long since turned to dust. The static on the baby monitor dissolved into a soft, rhythmic humming that made my skin crawl. I sat frozen in the dark living room, staring at the small black box sitting innocuously on the coffee table. It was supposed to be off, unplugged for months, yet its green LED pulsed like a slow, steady heartbeat. The tune was ancient and mournful, a melody I had never heard but somehow recognized from the depths of my own forgotten memories. I grabbed the handset to silence it, expecting the screech of feedback or the dead air of a broken device. Instead, the voice grew louder, clearer, and undeniably human, singing directly into the empty cradle in the next room. My hands trembled as I realized the lullaby wasn't coming from the receiver. It was being broadcast from it. I ran to the nursery door, throwing it open with a desperate need to prove to myself that the device was glitching. The room was cold and empty, save for the dust motes dancing in the sliver of moonlight cutting across the floor. There was no crib, no changing table, no evidence that children had ever lived here, only the lingering scent of milk and powder that shouldn't exist. I looked down at the monitor again, watching the green light blink in perfect sync with the humming in my ear. The singer whispered a name through the speaker, a name I hadn't spoken aloud since the day I signed the adoption papers they told me were fake. I realized then why the house felt so crowded, and why the walls seemed to lean in closer every night. The monitor wasn't picking up a signal from outside. It was recording what had been happening in that room long before I moved in. The mud was still wet against the grain of my hardwood floor, fresh and pungent with the scent of deep earth. I checked the basement lock for the third time that week, finding it bolted tight from the inside where no one had been. Yet there they were, 12 distinct, heavy impressions marching in a perfect circle around my kitchen table. In the center lay a single raw egg, shell intact and unbroken by any visible force. I swept them up every morning, burying the grit in the yard as if erasing the evidence could erase the violation. The mud always returned before dawn, darker than the night before, smelling faintly of copper and decay. My cat refused to enter the room, hissing at an empty corner where the air grew cold enough to fog my breath. I began recording the process, setting up cameras pointed directly at the door and the table alike. The footage showed nothing but static for hours, then a sudden jump cut to the footprints already formed. I stopped sleeping, convinced that something was practicing its shape in the dark beneath my feet. Today, however, the pattern shifted. The circle was no longer closed, but leading inward toward me. I looked down at my own bare feet and realized the mud wasn't coming from the basement door. It was bleeding out of my pores. The sound of my own voice screaming for help echoed from inside the walk-in closet, sharp and terrified. I stood frozen in the hallway, my lips pressed together so tightly they ached, knowing I hadn't made a single sound. The door remained shut, but the muffled pleas grew louder, vibrating against the thin wood with desperate urgency. I raised a trembling hand to touch the cold surface, half expecting to feel the frantic pounding of another's fists. Instead, the screaming stopped abruptly, replaced by a wet, heavy silence that felt heavier than the noise. A slow, deliberate click echoed from within, signaling the unlocking of the latch. The door creaked open an inch, revealing nothing but the dark void where my winter coats usually hung. I leaned in, straining to see into the depths, but only shadows seemed to shift and coil. Then a hand shot out from the darkness, grabbing my wrist with a grip that crushed bone. I tried to pull away, but the force was impossible, dragging me forward into the cramped space. As my head passed through the doorway, I heard my own voice speak from behind me, calm and detached. "Finally," it said, stepping past where I had just been standing. I realized then that the thing pulling me in wasn't trying to hide, it was trying to take my place.